You're listening to the Archaeology Podcast Network.
You have my sword.
And you have my bow.
And my trowel. Hi, you're listening to episode 37 of At My Trowel, where we look at the fantastic side of archaeology and the archaeological side of fantasy. I'm Ash.
And I'm Tilly.
And something rather terrible has happened.
Oh no, what's happened?
Love. That's what's happened.
Wait, I thought that you were a romantic, Ash. Don't you read lots of romance novels and stuff?
Well, I am, but that's beside the point, okay? Have you been outside? It's like the whole kingdom has been taken over by sickly sweet flowers and red hearts. It's actually making me slightly nauseated.
Oh, hang on, let me just look out the window. Oh, gee, what on earth has happened?
It's Valentine's Day.
Oh.
Yeah, and you know exactly what that means. That pesky diaper-wearing cherub is out again and he's shooting folk with golden arrows.
Oh, Cupid, no. I thought that he was banned from the kingdom. Didn't the mages cast like a repellent blast on his last year?
Yeah, but I think that only lasts like 365 days. So clearly they've forgotten to recast it because, you know, the mages are useless. And so they're all under Cupid's spell.
Typical.
Yeah, but I have a plan.
Okay.
I've been reading in the archives and I've found a note regarding Cupid's arrows, okay?
Oh.
So he has two arrows, one that's sharp and golden for love, lust and everything in between. And then he has another one, a blunt one, lead, and it's for fostering aversion and fear.
But we can't just shoot everyone with the lead one. We'll cause mass panic.
Right, okay, fine, precisely. But if he has both arrows, that suggests that there's another arrow out there, right? One is that a balance in between, okay? The Arrow of Ambivalence.
The Arrow of Ambivalence. Uh-huh. But where do we find this arrow? I mean, does the note in the archive say anything? Its description, location?
I'm already one step ahead of you, okay? Because I've called in some experts and they can help us identify and possibly locate our arrow. Tilly, re-meet experimental archaeologists, prehistoric technical experts and founders of Ancient Craft, Emma Jones and Dr. James Dilley.
Welcome.
Hello
there.
Excellent. Oh, then I feel better. We're definitely going to get that pesky Cupid. Thank you so much for joining us today. And yeah, when we originally did this thing, Ash was like, I can't say, Tilly, meet these people because you know them already. And I was like, it's fine. It's artistic license.
Re-meet them.
but indeed, welcome back. It's been a while. For those listening, you may, if you've listened to Tea Break Time Travel, shameless self-plug here, remember that both Emma and James came on separate episodes, so do go back and listen to them. But for those who haven't, they have maybe no idea who you are, or they only know the surface who you are. So who are you? What do you do? For example, what exactly is an experimental archaeologist?
Well, yeah, thank you so much for having us back. It's lovely to chat with you both today. I also love the fact that James is going to be talking about the Arrow of Ambivalence on a love podcast, because I think that's really perfectly suited for him. I think there's nothing that gives him more glee than the idea of Cupid or you guys interjecting and running around and trying to stop everyone from being smushy. So, yeah, we're experimental archaeologists, and I guess, James, do you want to sort of expand on what that is?
Yeah, so experimental archaeology is a component of the many facets of archaeology. I suppose most people think of archaeologists being stuck in often a muddy hole in the ground looking for all sorts of objects, remains connected to the human past. That can be sometimes animal remains that can help build a picture of the environment that humans were lived in, but generally human focused. But as well as those field archaeologists that are excavating, there are people who specialize in geophysics, surveying, you name it. And experimental archaeology is one of those components, but we're not often found out in the field. We'll be given access to the actual finds, or look at a wider structure or even a whole landscape and look at how that site or object came into being through its production, how it was used and how it was destroyed or why it was discarded. So on I guess, a typical level, let's say it's a stone axe, for example, we would look at how it was made, why they chose the particular material, what tools are required to work that material to produce similar results to what we've found as the actual artifact. And then we would test it to see how it might have been used, because in theory, an axe is an axe, and that's a fairly easy one. But there are so many objects from the past that seem a little more mysterious, and trying to work out its function can be quite difficult without testing all of the possible scenarios. And even then, you might not find out. And certainly, if it was an object that was used for a variety of functions, it can muddy the water somewhat. And then by testing them to destruction, we can find out why they were perhaps discarded. It might have been intentional breakage to ritually kill the object, so it couldn't be used by hands on this mortal coil. It could only be used by otherworldly forces. Or it might have just broken because it was rubbish.
I was about to say, is this just you coming up with an excuse of like your broken things to be like, no, I'm testing the ritual importance of it. Also, ritual, we have, listeners, we are very excited to share with you our brand new ritual buzzer, which we're going to test out now and see if this works.
Ritual! There you go.
It worked!
I want one of them.
Absolutely hilarious.
Great. Excellent. Well, that's been my morning's work, basically. Is trying to make a ritual buzzer.
We sort of led you into that, didn't we? Just so we could get the buzzer.
But the experimental archaeological side of things in terms of kind of where people work, because speaking as someone who is slightly involved with experimental archaeology, specifically XArch, then just a little part of my life. One of the big discussions around experimental archaeology that I'm aware of is whether it is a real archaeology or a real science. And I'm curious what your guys' take is on that. I mean, Emma coming from a not so archaeological focused background, James from a more archaeological focused background. How does that tie into how you experience experimental archaeology?
So experimental archaeology, by I guess its name on the tin, implies that there has to be some kind of experiment. And generally with an experiment, there has to be controls and variables and have some idea of the parameters of that experiment. So although I've talked about that stone axe and how finding out how it might have been made and used and broken and all the other parts of its life biography, actually when you're trying to run an experiment in archaeology, it really needs to be quite focused. So you might look at the specific raw material type and not expand outwards, because otherwise it would just be a huge sprawling experiment that would be very difficult to control. What you could do is lots of little experiments that are part of a larger research study that all come together, both in a real world setting, actually going out and knocking down a tree with an axe, or in very controlled settings in a lab using something like an impact tower where you can start to measure velocities and forces and that sort of thing. And by combining the two, that real world setting as well as the lab-based setting, you can start to pick apart how that object works or doesn't work in many cases. And I suppose once you start to go outside having a controlled experiment and a hypothesis and a null hypothesis, you start to drift into what is generally considered these days as experiential archaeology, which sounds very similar, but the difference being that rather than experimenting, you are experiencing archaeology. And for both Emma and I, we sort of straddle the two, I suppose, because we attend lots of events. We run workshops where people can come and cast a bronze sword or make that stone axe, or do our own YouTube videos or appear on podcasts. And by you, I'm now talking to you, dear listener. You are experiencing the archaeology through the sound of my voice. And you are part of that experiential archaeology. But
So
clearly...
Proper breaking the fourth wall here.
Anytime I get the opportunity, honestly. But I suppose the two are quite different in that experimental archaeology, as I said, is not very fixed, but it's very controlled, whereas experiential archaeology is extremely open to interpretation and is very flexible and organic. The two are quite different but sound very similar, and they work together frequently because you can do an experiment in very controlled conditions in a lab that isn't open to the public, but an opportunity can be identified to provide some kind of public demonstration, or it might be covered by some piece of news, whether it be archaeology news or wider news. And the fact that it's been broadcast out to a wider audience, it becomes experiential. Or, as Emma and I have done fairly recently, building a replica Bronze Age boat with a load of ex-service people. That was very much experiential archaeology, but we could see opportunities for experiments within that production. So the two work closely together.
I think that the time that we spend interacting with people doing experiential archaeology also helps to feed back into the more experimental archaeology work that we do, because sometimes you'll be, in quite an open context, having open discussions, and ideas will form through that act, almost of, as in essence, I guess it's a form of play, that you can then kind of go, oh, actually, that's something that is really worthwhile exploring. Now let's go away, set some controls and explore this in a more scientific manner, so we can actually get some, results from this. So I think, both of them feed back and forth into one another, and it's quite important for me that we have that balance in our kind of calendar year, and they complement each other really nicely.
That's so interesting. I've never actually heard of, how did you say it?
Experiential.
Experiential. I
feel like we need an experiential buzzer.
That's a very cool word. I felt like moved by that word alone. You've both mentioned different types of materials. So you've mentioned, boats, axes, stone, bronze. So what types of materials do you usually work with? And do you have a specialism in that area?
So for myself, I usually work with a range of materials that were used in the Stone Age and Bronze Age for creating personal ornamentation, so things that would have been worn for decoration. It also encompasses tattooing and body paints, but for me, I'm generally looking at jewellery. So that might include materials like jet, amber, gold, shale, bronze, to name a few. It also includes bone. And I mean, there are materials that people were using in prehistory that we don't necessarily have in the archaeological record. Things like wood, feathers, seeds that were potentially being used. We just unfortunately don't have anything that can tangibly kind of give us a reference point for me to copy. So I guess while I don't work with those materials as much, they're very much relevant to the area of study that I look at.
I like how you just were like, oh, I just have a couple of things and then proceeded to list like 20 different materials and a wide range of things. Like, oh yeah, true. Yeah, you don't have that much experience at all, Emma. Yeah, you're right. Yeah.
You named I wrote them down, 8. You named 8.
Just off the top of her head.
Yeah, so I'll sort of work with these. Amazing.
Yeah, I don't know what more I can say.
No, that's fine. I'm just in awe. And I guess do you both work in similar materials or similar areas, or have you kind of divided and conquered?
We have a bit of a crossover, don't we, James? I mean, we both bronze cast, James more so for axes and tool making. I sometimes help with that in the workshop if we need to for orders. But if we're going to produce something for an experimental archaeology project or, university or museum handling, usually that's James kind of fulfilling those orders. In the tool sense, we, I guess, cross over a little bit with stoneworking. While I'm no flint napper, and James obviously is an extremely experienced flint napper, I do use flint and some of the stones that we used for axe head production in the Neolithic, like Langdale Tuff and Bricelli Bluestone, to make smaller, cuter, wearable jewellery for a more modern audience as opposed to a replica. Yeah. So, yeah.
Sorry, no worries. But I always figure it's better to pause rather than talk.
Yes.
Over me.
I was doing the same.
Did you have anything to add, James?
Yeah, well, I think Emma's mostly covered it. I suppose my main focus is stone tools and flint knapping, as well as bronze casting, because I've been doing that, well, certainly for flint knapping since I was about 10 years old, and the bronze casting came a few years later. So that's generally been my focus, and there have been other crafts attached to it. But the area that I cover is quite wide, I suppose, because although the Bronze Age is relatively short, the Stone Age is several 100,000 years long. And although we both cover that, unfortunately, there just isn't anywhere near as much in the way of pieces of ornamentation as there are to stone tools, which makes those pieces of ornamentation that much more special. But it does mean that there is a huge amount of stone tool material out there. And flint knapping is an incredibly difficult craft that takes years and years of practice. And even now, after over 20 years practice, there's still a lot that I have to learn. So that's why I generally deal with the pointy rock side of things.
I like that. The pointy rocks. So you divide and conquer is pointy rocks and jewelry. to be very, very summary.
Now we have some questions for you that aren't necessarily experimental archaeology based, but we're curious, do you read fantasy books? Do you enjoy reading fantasy books?
I would
go ahead.
go for it, James.
Oh, who's going to go break first? I'll take it then. I'll take the initiative. Generally, when I'm working and when I'm napping or preparing to do some casting or making molds, I will be listening to some kind of audiobook. I unfortunately just don't get as much time as I'd like to sort of sit down and read, whether it be archaeological books or as well as fiction books. But I do have some favourites along the way, which I suppose will come up shortly. But I think Em is much about the same, although she might say that when we're both on long cart journeys for events that we do still listen to a book here and there.
Yeah, I would say that past Em, the little Em that grew up devouring books, has lost as much time as I once had to read. I enjoy fantasy books, but I would also say that it wouldn't. Oh gosh, I'm fumbling this one.
No, not at all. You can admit that you don't like fantasy books. We will not judge you for it. It's all okay.
We'll secretly judge you for it.
In one of our most recent episodes, our guest also said she doesn't like fantasy, so it's fine. It's fine.
I don't dislike fantasy. I wouldn't say that it was my initial go-to. I would say I'm an eclectic reader, and it features. That's the best way of summing it up.
That's fair. And so you mentioned some favourites, James, but are they fantasy favourites, or are you? For some reason, when I picture you doing your flint knapping and listening to an audiobook, I picture you listening to something very epic and serious. Is that the case, or? Yeah,
I mean. I think for a long time I've listened to some of these sort of Roman-based novels that sort of Ben Kane and some of the others. And it's a strange one because I often sort of joke about not liking the Romans or that sort of thing, but there's so few.
Who does?
Well, exactly.
Nobody likes the Romans.
but I do love a bit of military history as well. I'm very much a boy in that sense of enjoying a bit of military history. But for actual, I suppose, fantasy novels, my all-time favourite is The Witcher series.
Excellent.
Yes,
Good
I
choice.
love the Witcher
Good
series.
choice.
So good.
Books, the games, brilliant.
So much so that he's modelled his hairstyle. He's even gone to the commitment of turning grey out of his love of The Witcher.
That's not stress or genetics at all. That's,
it's a fashion choice. It's a fashion choice.
If if your eyes suddenly turn yellow and cat-like, then we've got a problem.
Doesn't his eyes turn black and get all weird veins and stuff?
Yeah, when he takes a potion.
Oh, that's the potion taking.
Yeah,
that's true.
That's what happens when Arsenal loses.
Yeah, if the eyes start going yellow, then I think it might be a time for a hospital trip, because the old liver is clearly on the blink.
Well, we're in a fantasy setting right now, so
Yeah, it's fine. That's just a normal side effect. It's all good. But, well, thank you so much to both of you for joining us. We're looking. Oh! Did you just feel the ground shake, Ash?
Oh no, do you think Cupid has upset one of the gods again?
Well, if he has, I don't want to know about it. So, okay, you guys all stay here. I'll go and activate the wrathful god wards, and we'll be right back. Okay, wards are activated. No apocalyptic events for us in the near future, at least. So, we really need to find this arrow, and as soon as possible.
Agreed. I think we should look a little bit of how we're going to identify this arrow. So let's look at the books.
As always, literature review. Got to start with the literature review. So, arrows. Which books have you read that feature arrows or objects? Are magical arrows? Objects that incite a person to love? I mean, it's
so difficult. I find it really difficult.
Yeah. Emma or James, do you know of any examples?
Well, definitely for the Eagles of the Empire series, the Simon Scarrow book, there are loads and loads of arrows in it, being a sort of Roman-based military series, but not very magical, sadly.
Okay. But indeed, arrows, I mean, they are quite a common, military weapon, I suppose, up until a certain point. So yeah, that's
what I was thinking. I found a lot of like random arrow objects that were like related to elves and stuff like that. So like the Dark Elf trilogy, which is part of like, the Forgotten Realms and Baldur's Gate and D&D and stuff. They have enchanted arrows and things, but it wasn't necessarily like a very specific arrow like Cupid's arrow. Oh. It was actually quite annoying. And again, The Witcher, bringing it back to The Witcher, they have kind of generic magical arrows as well. But it was really difficult to find a very specific arrow. Is there a specific arrow?
I was a bit sad when I looked a bit further into Princess Mononoke, because they've got an obsidian. She's got an obsidian, what I thought was kind of arrow-like, that she wears around her neck. But they've actually, it's technically a dagger. So I thought that would be a really nice tie-in, but yeah. That's a bit disappointing.
Technically, could you use an arrowhead and strap it to a thing? I mean, you're experimental archaeologists. Could you use an arrowhead as a blade of a dagger?
I mean, to be fair, quite like the blades that James makes for the Urtsy dagger look quite similar to arrowheads when they're not hafted. So over to you, James.
Well, yes, I guess for Urtsy specifically, the finders actually commented that had Urtsy's flint knife not been found with its handle, they would have thought it's an arrowhead. But certainly, I think for Princess Mononoke, that wearing a dagger around your neck, that's if it's not in a sheath, because certainly when you see her, it's visible. So, a small arrowhead you can get away with, but anything larger than that is just asking for trouble. But I guess particularly for Studio Ghibli, there is that archaeological connection through a variety of their productions, and obsidian being a key part of Japanese prehistory and elsewhere as well. I'm sure Em is going to jump in here with one of her other favourites that features perhaps an archaeologist rather than archaeology as such.
Yeah, I was just singing in my head, Totoro, Totoro. Yeah, my neighbour Totoro. I guess the dad's an archaeologist, isn't he, James?
Yeah.
I actually have no idea who any of these people are. Have I completely missed out on something?
Stop it. You have got to go and watch a lot of films now.
Okay.
And what utter joy you're going to have doing it.
I'm noting this down. No.
Oh, yeah. See, Tilly's not great with animated series.
Oh, true.
Fair enough.
But I mean, I don't mind them, but I guess I just, Oh, interesting. Okay. All right. Well, I'll give them a go.
I think
there's archaeology involved.
Top favourites would be My Neighbour Totoro. It's very like cutesy and kind of sweet. Princess Mononoke was the one I kind of entered James into watching first, thinking if this doesn't grab him, then I can just forget the rest. And I think
most military based.
Yeah. And then Ponyo is another favourite, but I haven't forced James to watch that yet. But usually what happens is if I'm not feeling very well or, a bit under the weather, James sort of goes, shall we watch My Neighbor Totoro? And I'm
It's the comfort one.
Yeah.
completely.
And they feature archaeology. See, okay, I feel I need to get into these because I'm missing out on this literature review.
Here and there.
There you go. It's like those, when you suddenly find out halfway through your research project that there's a whole book on the research project that you're doing, like on exactly the same subject. You're like, oh, for goodness sake, now I have
What
to
is
do
this?
extra reading. So yeah, there you go. I'm discovering all of these things. But
You could also watch Bluey because the dad's an archaeologist as well, because he's a dog and he digs bones.
That is the best reason to make James watch. Yeah, why did I not think of this?
And like sometimes when they go into his office, he has lots of different artifacts like on display and stuff.
there you go. It could be research, James. It could be, proper.
Emma, how have you not brought this up before?
I don't know.
Neither do I.
Very exciting. I have got ammunition for a Bluey binge, and I don't even have kids. Yes.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of, so obviously, what kind of reference I was trying to make, Ash, when I was trying to think of fantastical arrows.
It's so upsetting that you can think of one, Tilly.
Luckily,
great.
and I use the word luckily here very specifically. So the only thing I could think of was In Guards, which is about dragons, which is a Terry Pratchett book, which if you don't know who Terry Pratchett is, then you haven't listened to enough of this podcast yet. But
I think I've learned more about Terry Pratchett ever in my life by doing this podcast with Tilly.
I should rename it, and my trial, we should name it And Terry Pratchett.
I'm Terry Pratchett.
P.S. I love him.
Excellent. But yes, the book Guards, which is, and they're basically trying to shoot this dragon, and Sergeant Colon, who is one of the sergeants in the guard, has his lucky arrow, and he's never missed with his arrow, and all this kind of thing. But it is the best passage ever, because he's saying, no, 1 in a million chances always work, like they always have to be pulled off, so it's a 1 in a million chance. And they're going, well, is it really a 1 in a million chance? It's probably more of a 1 in a 5,099 chance, like maybe we need to. So they're trying to add in all of these extra aspects to make it more difficult, so that his lucky arrow can really be the 1 in a million chance to get it anyway. So it's a very amusing passage, and that is
It's very
the arrow.
amusing. To be fair, that's just made me think. You said a lucky arrow.
Yeah.
The black arrow in Lord of the Rings.
The black arrow, of
used by
course.
Bard the Bowman to kill Smaug.
Yes. Yeah.
Well, it disappears in the end, but that has magical properties. Well, kind of, because he always says it never fails him, never broke, and it was handed down generations, and then it disappears when he kills Smaug. So
it actually disappears. It sort of flitters into
it
nothing.
goes into Smaug's body, and then
yeah.
Smaug disappears, and then it disappears forever.
Okay,
And I
there
guess
you go.
what I quite like about that as a reference is the fact that it's an heirloom item. And I guess that tie into a lot of what probably more what I look at with the jewellery, because we get examples of collections of beads that have varying degrees of use and wear, implying that it's sort of been this collection that's been generated over time and possibly passed down through generation and generation until it eventually kind of arrives at its resting place. And I guess it's not quite the same as a kind of epic arrow that's killed a dragon, but yeah.
I mean, it's
still
basically the same. You are a dragon slayer, Emma. Let's just keep it at that.
I'm crafting dragon weapons. The meaning that's attached to objects, whether that's as it's, the sole purpose is for destroying something or connecting people, or like a lucky charm, because I guess the black arrow is sort of a bit of a lucky charm in a way, isn't it? It's not really proven that it's magical, but if it never fails, it's sort of got this agency that's attached to it, and therefore it becomes something that maybe it wasn't necessarily in the first place, but
I like that idea.
Yeah, it builds a mythology around it.
Yeah.
Almost.
It builds its own story.
So, and I guess for those two parts that Emma brought up, for the connecting and the destroying, for the connecting, a really unusual appearance of a flint arrow is in Batman Begins, the film, when a young Bruce Wayne is playing outside on the grounds with Rachel, and he finds a napped arrowhead, which she steals from him as kids are playing, and that's when he falls into the cave.
Down the cave.
With all the bats coming out, and she later gifts it to him when I guess they sort of re-meet later in life, for the man who could buy everything.
I completely missed that was an arrowhead. I need to no. I'm going to have to
things
rewatch Batman Begins. Yeah.
I really hope we don't have to contact Batman to find this arrow, though.
Oh, there we go. That's the next episode.
Just call him.
Excuse me. Well, it's okay. I'll get my light set up and then we can call him coming in. We've got the bat light or the bat alarm or whatever it's called.
It'll be a few million lumens required, but I'm sure.
It'll be fine. It's very overcast today, so I'm fine.
Yeah, it's fine. We'll get the magicians to do it.
Yeah.
And come on, a really well-known reference to, and particularly stone-tipped arrows, are the dragon glass from Game of Thrones.
Of course. I can, see?
See, I haven't read Game of Thrones.
This is why we need to collaborate with other researchers when doing this kind of thing, because people know things that we don't, or remember things that we don't. So, there you go.
Did you say that you have read the series, Ash?
No, I have not.
I also haven't.
I haven't.
I have.
I've watched them,
I just said that I didn't read that much fantasy, but that's one of the things that
You're actually a fantasy aficionado. You know, Lord of the Rings. You know,
immediately went into the Black Arrow.
But I don't. You don't meet many people that have, obviously, because the series was so popular. I was being probably obtuse, and when everyone was watching probably into the second series, I was refusing point blank to watch it until I'd finished the books.
This was
because
me.
I didn't have time to
read them.
It was like that horrible feeling of my magical world is going to be destroyed as soon as I glance upon whoever they've cast for this person, and then forget about it. And everything is so much better in my head than anything that you can pull off in because of costs and other people's ideas.
I think it happens a lot with just the fantasy when it's put into a TV show in general. I think everyone's like, a bit disappointed.
And gone are the days where I can remember what Aragorn looked like pre-film.
I know.
Because
true. Yeah, I have no idea.
It was all kind of happening at the same time, when the films came out.
Who did we say for that recently, Tilly? We had that conversation that it was the film supplanted the characterization of someone.
I feel like that.
Da Vinci Code.
Interview someone in the X-Arc about that.
That as well, probably. I like how everyone knows more about my background things than I do. No, we were talking about the Da Vinci Code, which I have never seen, and we read it recently for the Archaeo Book Club, and I was going, I wouldn't have pictured Ian McKellen as, what's his name? I was picturing Brian Blessed, which is a very different kind of casting. Anyway, but coming back to the arrow. So we've looked at kind of featuring magical arrows, but what about then, because the specifics of Cupid's arrow. So Ash, perhaps, what do you know about Cupid, itself and his arrows?
Well, Cupid is the Roman god of love. In the Greek myth, he's Eros.
Yes, of course.
And he's often depicted as the son of Venus or Aphrodite, who is the goddess of love, beauty, and desire. He has 2 arrows. Okay, and I've said this before in the previous bit, but 2 arrows have the opposite effect. So one's golden, induces love and intense desire, while the lead one causes aversion and indifference. Usually his role within, mythology is to control and manipulate love, either by his own choice or often by his mother's request.
Fair, yes.
And then it kind of shapes the mortal and divine relationships. He also has his own kind of famous myth between, I would know it's Eros and Psyche, but obviously it'd be Cupid and Psyche, in which his mother, Aphrodite Venus, is extremely jealous of Psyche and her beauty and sends Cupid to make her fall in love with someone really hideous, but then Cupid actually falls in love with
what
Psyche.
A stupid idea. Oh no, this woman is too beautiful and otherworldly. Let me send my son, the god of love, to go and deal with her. Oh no, they fell in love. What a weird thing happened.
And it's something she's not allowed to look at him either. He's not because of his mother. He married her and things like that. But then she's not allowed to look upon his face. And so she does. She holds a candle to him and then realizes, because her evil sisters tell her that he's probably hideous and ugly and disgusting, but actually he's like really beautiful. He's not a tiny Cupid baby. He's actually a man.
Fair, yeah.
Or God. But basically, Cupid's arrows symbolize the uncontrolled and often irrational nature of love, capable of creating joy and heartache.
Yeah. But then there aren't really any other than arrows specifically that look at. And I'm trying to think of even any other objects that are sort of to do with love magic.
Yeah, I mean, the only thing I can think of was really potions, like love potions and traditional
exactly.
kind of folklore.
Yeah. Also featuring Terry Pratchett, by the way.
Yeah, I did think of one, which was kind of... Of course they do. To be fair, he has done so much.
I was about to say, it has to. This is a great thing. I can
him.
always find a reference.
She actually can. Like, if I give her a challenge, she can. The one thing I thought of was T. Kingfisher, if anyone's read their books, Swordheart, right? But this is a sword who is cursed, a man who's cursed to be a sword. Yes. So actually, it's an enchanted object falling in love.
Well, you know, agency, quite good. Object biography.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, imagine that biography.
Yeah, no, because in other things, I don't. James or Emma, do you know of any examples of love-related objects in fantasy or other fiction?
Good question. I was just going to add that we actually listened to the chapter on Cupid in the Mythos Stephen Fry's book.
Great!
On the podcast last night, brilliant.
Yeah.
So if anyone hasn't listened to that and wants to hear the story told wonderfully, then that is definitely a good place to go.
I would agree.
Yeah, it kind of stumped me. And I guess one of the things that it sent me down a little bit of a rabbit hole, because I'm not I cannot claim to be an authority on Lord of the Rings, as many people are incredibly well read and read. Oh my God, it's unbelievable listening to whoever you had on the Exarch podcast and the level of detail that people go into interpreting the
Rangers.
literature. Unbelievable. But I guess for me, I immediately thought about the even star that Arwen gives Aragorn, but looking into it further, that's sort of not really explained anywhere. It's not something that was even it wasn't intended to be an interaction between Arwen and Aragorn from the book. So it's something that's sort of been put in place of, I think it was the elf stone from the book.
Yeah, we talked about this actually.
It has an entirely different meaning.
Yes, we spoke about this in our episode with Dr. Sigrid van Rode looking at magical jewellery, indeed. It was a sort of extra thing that was put into the films to represent love and to represent the life of Arwen, which I found really interesting.
Completely.
But every time I hear Morning Star, like the Morning Star, I just immediately think of like Satan. Like that's my problem because I think of Lucifer straight away, and that's probably my
his name's Morning Star. Yeah,
every single time.
Fair.
Which shouldn't really be in a podcast about Valentine's Day, but never mind.
So maybe someone needs to start writing fantasy and actually including these items in it, because it seems like such a missed opportunity, doesn't it? Of what we would think today that we give gifts at Valentine's Day, or you would show somebody your affection. I mean, obviously, Cupid's whole deal when he entered into this kind of relationship with Psyche was that he gave her everything he could ever dream of, thinking that she could want. But yet it does seem to be a bit of a gap when you start to look into the world of fantasy.
There you go.
There we go. That's a challenge.
That's our challenge. Yeah, we have to write those fantasy books.
Yeah.
Sorry, guys.
Listeners, you need to do it as well.
Done. We are now writing.
Ready, go.
Yes.
We are all fantasy authors now.
Someone out there listening's got to, take the time.
Yeah, gonna get it.
Just
definitely.
get in touch with us when you do, because then we can feature it in the podcast.
Yeah, we'll add it in later on. What was that? Was that the letterbox?
Oh, I wasn't expecting post today. Let me have a check. Oh my gosh, what is going on? Why is there a 6-foot pile of pink and red cards at our door?
Ugh. They're Valentine's cards from Cupid. And they smell enchanted. Brilliant. Okay, we need to get these out of the office now.
Yep. Okay. So, right, we need to quickly cut short this episode of And My Trial, but don't worry, we're going to be continuing next episode with part 2 of our special chat with Emma Jones and Dr. James Dilley. In the meantime, as always, please do follow, like, subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. And remember, if you want to support the APN even more tangibly, you can also become a member and get access to early released episodes, bonus recordings, and all kinds of fun swag. All content information, as well as more information on the points discussed today, can be found in the show notes.
The Archaeology Podcast Network is 10 years old this year. Our executive producer is Ashley Airy, our social media coordinator is Matilda Siebrecht, and our chief editor is Rachel Roden. The Archaeology Podcast Network was co-founded by Chris Webster and Tristan Boyle in 2014 and is part of Culturo Media and DigTech LLC.
This has been a presentation of the Archaeology Podcast Network. Visit us on the web for show notes and other podcasts at www.archpodnet.com. Contact us at chris@archaeologypodcastnetwork.com.